Well, it's nice to be back at IU, even if it is for a very short stay this time, and to see a lot of familiar faces and a few new faces and new people that I get to meet. Somebody who knows tech.
You can use arrow keyboard there. Arrow keyboard.
Use it on the keyboard. Just use the arrow functions. Down at the arrows. Just hit with.
And this room has 2 keyboards, which
Okay.
I found out the hard way. So
Okay, so yeah, this one does work. Okay. So probably all of you at some point have done some research where you started with a particular idea in mind, and as you were going along and doing the research or looking at your study, something changed or something came up and you took a little detour that was unexpected. Maybe it was your research site that changed, or your research participants, or your research questions, or your focus of your research changed. Something changed. And so what I'm presenting today is a change that happened in my research. The information that I'm sharing, as Linda said, came out of my dissertation research that I did last year in Costa Rica. But what I'm sharing was not part of my original research questions. It was not part of my original literature review. It was not in any way planned to be part of my research. So this little piece that I've pulled out that I'm sharing today is a detour in the research. My dissertation research focuses on English teacher preparation, and I did the data collection at 2 universities in Costa Rica, the largest public universities in Costa Rica, the University of Costa Rica and the National University of Costa Rica. And while it would probably be typical to some way obscure where I did the research, like sometimes we say a large Midwestern university, in Costa Rica there aren't a lot of universities. And there are only 4 public universities, and only 2 of them are large. And so it becomes obvious very quickly where I did my research when I say that. So I go ahead and use the names of them, but I will honor the promise that I made to the research participants, and I won't, of course, give their names. So in 2006, I was living in Costa Rica, teaching in a teacher education program there. And one day I had a problem with my US bank card, and I needed to call the US to find out what was going on with this bank card. So I have to buy a special international phone card, spend extra money to do that, get the phone card, call the 1-800 number in the US. They transfer me through to whoever the person is, and as I'm talking to them, I try to explain, my problem is I can't just go to the bank branch in the US, I'm living in Costa Rica. And the person on the other end of the line said, "Oh really? Where are you in Costa Rica?" And I said, "Alajuela." He said, "Oh, that's where I live." And my call had been, I had called the US only to be transferred back to a call center just a few kilometers from where I was living. And so that was my introduction to call centers in Costa Rica. I moved back to the US, but when I went back in 2008 to do my early inquiry project, I ran into an article in the newspaper about some of the problems that the Ministry of Education was having with teachers leaving to go work in call centers. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, but I put it to one side because that was not my focus. As I was collecting data with my research this last year, I started to notice that in almost every interview that I did with professors, administrators, and students, the word call centers came up over and over and over and over. And I said, something's going on here. Something needs to be looked at a little bit more. And I share this picture here, which comes from a website called Only in Costa Rica. And so it's a truck on top of another truck being hauled down the road someplace in Costa Rica. And call center has become so common in Costa Rica that somebody has written this on the back of their truck and given some phone number there for people to call. What is also interesting is there is a Spanish word for call center, but it is not used. And in the newspaper, they will give the word call center and then translate that into Spanish. And now they're not even translating it because everybody knows what that term means. So it's come into the language as a term on its own. So I started to think about some questions. What is the history of call centers in Costa Rica, especially with regard to English teaching and learning? And how do they appear to be impacting English teaching and learning in Costa Rica? To what extent? And are those same impacts also being seen elsewhere? And if so, are they, I should say, how are they being managed? Are they being managed and how? And what are the implications for English teacher preparation programs at universities? And what might be the long-term implications of the arrival of call centers? So what the literature says is very little. If you try to look something up about call centers and English teacher preparation, or call centers and English learning and teaching, there's little that's out there. So there are a few things that show up when you look at this, when you look for information on call centers, and it's typically only about development and globalization in general, and how call centers are a part of that. Does not address English teaching. It's about the management aspects. There's quite a bit of research on the management aspects of the business of call centers. How do you route calls and how do you employ people? But not about its impact on English teaching and learning. There's research about why teachers are leaving the teaching profession in general, but it only appears to indirectly address some of the issues raised by professors and students in Costa Rica, and I think probably in other locations. And where there is some research, it tends to be about accent reduction for non-native speakers working in those locations, or in the choice of accent or identity among the employees. It's fairly common in locations such as Philippines and India for the employees of the call centers to make a choice. Are they going to have a British accent or an American accent? And they try to develop that. And they take on another identity, another name, and go so far perhaps even outside of their work environment to use that name. And they become that persona of who they are working in the call center. The only research that I could find was for India and the Philippines. So there's no research that I could find on the impact of call centers, specifically in this area, call centers on English teachers or English teacher preparation. So the data collection from my dissertation and what I used for looking at call centers, I did 12 individual interviews at the University of Costa Rica and 13 at the National University, and did 3 different interviews at each university with groups of students. And in addition, looking at newspaper articles from both the English and Spanish newspapers and various government reports. So to just give you a little bit of history of how call centers came into Costa Rica and their connection with English language teaching there. As the world began to change in the last 30 years, and the economy in the world began to change, then job opportunities began to change as we see this globalization happening. And it had a special impact in the developing world. And Costa Rica knew that they had to change as well. And in 1994, they elected a president, President Figueres, who came in with the promise of moving Costa Rica ahead. So his idea was, we're at this point in our history where we need to make a decision. And one of the studies I looked at compared Costa Rica to the Dominican Republic and the choices they made at that point, and where Costa Rica ended up and where the Dominican Republic ended up, and the choices they made as far as the industries that they tried to attract to their country. President Figueres had the vision of moving the country in a direction that would put them up what is known as the value chain in the global production process, that it would move them more toward services and it would move them more toward technology and away from manufacturing and clothing industry like they had done before, and move them away from being dependent on bananas and coffee, which were the main exports before that time. And he hoped to increase Costa Rican's standard of living. So he had an aggressive policy of investment attraction to Costa Rica. And actually, his policy is now used as a textbook example of how to attract transnational companies to your country. So he is elected in 1994, and in 1995, they start increased efforts in English and in technology in the schools. Why English with technology? Because they needed English for the technology companies that they were trying to attract. In 1997, the company Intel arrives in Costa Rica. That is the first big transnational company that they are able to attract to Costa Rica. And that opens the door for more transnational companies to come in, and it starts to open the door for call centers to arrive in Costa Rica. And this was a quote from the Minister of Education in 1997 at the National Conference of Teachers of English. Globalization has always been on the minds of our people. Last century became global because by being one of the first nations to install electric lights. We will continue to be global into the next millennium by putting computers in every classroom and teaching English to our younger generations to equip them with the knowledge and skills necessary to become citizens of the world. So it's very much this thought pattern of we need English and we need technology to move our society ahead. By 2003, call centers have risen, the number of call centers have risen so much by that point that the Office of Social Security in their reports now adds a separate category of employees called call center workers. And from 2000 until today, they've been growing at a rate of 10% every year. In 2007, what was known as CAFTA, or in Costa Rica, it was known as the TLC. It is the free trade agreement with the US and Central American countries. That opens the door even further to more companies coming in. And by 2008, the Ministry of Education, MEP, they decided at that point in a separate project to begin testing their teachers' level of English for those who are teaching English. And many of them are only at the beginner or advanced beginner level. At the same time, reports start to appear in the newspapers, and that was the one that I saw when I was there in 2008, that teachers are starting to desert the classroom in favor of going and working at a call center because it's less stressful, and at that point, it paid a lot more. The call centers did not have enough people that they could employ. And so, they are starting to try to get people from other call centers to come and work for them, and then their eyes turn to what's the most logical place for people who have the best English? Let's go after the teachers in the schools and attract them. So the salaries start to go up in the call centers. They were already more than what you could earn as a teacher, and it becomes very attractive to leave teaching and to move into working in a call center. In the news in 2008, this appeared on March 3, 2008 in the main newspaper there in Costa Rica, and the company Sykes offered 500 places, but they could only fill 100. That was the demand and what they're able to fill. So they are short 400 places to be able to employees to keep moving the call center ahead. So they are trying to attract a lot more people than are available who are bilingual. So they start pushing up, and this happens on March 3. And on June 2, the headline appears that English professors are changing the Ministry of Education for private firms. And so you see Sykes saying we don't have enough, and just a couple of months later, the Ministry of Education complaining that they're losing their teachers to those. So where are we now in 2012? What does that mean for teaching English in Costa Rica if English teachers are being pulled out of the classrooms. Are there any other things that have happened? So the preliminary findings from the data that I collected are, it's one of those good news, bad news kind of things. And we'll start with the bad news. This was from a professor at the University of Costa Rica, lamenting the fact that his students go to call centers and he is trying to tell them, please don't go. You've studied here for 4 years. You've put a lot of effort in. He says, I don't want them to end up in a call center. They've done too much. What is interesting is this particular professor left before he finished his English degree many years ago and left to work in tourism and only recently came back and finished his degree. And he actually had worked in a call center as well. And so he comes back and urges his students, don't do what I did, don't go. And basically, I made a lot of money at it, but don't go that far. So good news, bad news. Here's the bad news. Call centers pull both the university students away before they finish their degrees who are in English teaching programs. As soon as they get a high enough level, they're at the call centers. And because of time, I won't go through reading all of these quotes, but basically the teachers are feeling a lot of pressure in their classrooms. They may have up to 700 students a week that they're seeing, 40, 45 in a class, and they say, why should I be putting up with all of this when I could possibly get paid the same or more working at a call center? I go, I put in my 8 hours, I go home, I don't have to grade, I don't have to plan, I don't have to call parents, I don't have parents calling me, I don't have to deal with discipline or any of that. Another is that if they leave, they don't usually come back to English education. So whether they're leaving as a university student or whether they're leaving as a teacher already in the profession, once they leave, they're not coming back to education. If they leave the call center, what they're doing is they are typically going into tourism or into the most prestigious area and the one where you can make the most money, and that's in translation. One of the most popular degrees, master's degrees at the National University is the translation degree. And another one is that it limits the training that the government can give to English teachers. Because of the low level that most English teachers have, the government has implemented a program to try to increase their language level. But as the Minister of Education said, I can't provide them with too much training, and I heard this myself at a report that he gave, and he said I can't give them too much training for pragmatic reasons. On the European framework, we don't want them to get more than a particular level, which would be about advanced intermediate, because if they do, they're gone. And the government's paying for that training. So we can't train them any more than that. We can't improve our teachers' levels any more than that. In the good news, it provides an incentive and an opportunity to increase oral language skills. If you're talking all the time, you're going to increase certain skills. There's some question about if it increases a broad spectrum of skills, or if you're working for a bank call center and you're talking about the same thing every day, are you only increasing a certain area? And are you using more slang than perhaps more formal or academic English? So what kind of English is it really improving? It also provides funding for students' education. For those who don't have a way to fund their university education, if they can work in a call center, it provides funding for that. And lastly, it has forced the Ministry of Education to increase teacher pay, and it has almost doubled in the last 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I heard from different people exactly what they get paid, but a call center, person in a call center can usually start at about $700 a month. A typical average worker salary would be about $500 a month. So they're making more. The teachers will now make around $800 a month starting out. Where it really benefits the teachers is if they continue for more years and they get what's known as kind of like tenure, then their salary increases to as much as almost $2,000 a month now. So then it becomes a real incentive for them to stay in teaching, but it has been a push to get the Ministry of Education to increase salaries so that the call centers don't steal them away. Haven't improved the teachers' working conditions, but at least it has improved their pay. So some implications is the increased salaries for teachers might provide more incentive for more students to enroll in teacher education programs. The proficiency level of English teachers as a whole may go down, because if you pull out those who have the highest proficiency levels, then those who are still left teaching English may go down, and the learner outcomes for the country in English may go down as well. We don't know. And some teacher preparation programs may be restructured or eliminated because if students are going to get enough English to work in a call center and not to be a teacher, they don't want some of those classes. So they may change the way those programs work. And if teachers keep leaving, the Ministry of Education may eliminate that extra training for them as well. So some future directions is to look at some of these things that are happening and to look at that a little more closely, because I didn't start out with this and the interviews were not focused on this, so I need to go back and do a little bit more looking. And is it improving English for those who work in call centers? What are the long-term impacts? We don't know. What if at some point is this going to have a greater impact on English teaching there? Nobody knows at this point. And because I got the stop sign, I'm hurrying through. So there are conflicting views right now. It's everybody's, has their own opinion, but there's no concrete evidence, just what people think, especially on the pay. Everybody has their own opinion about who's really getting paid what. It's difficult to actually find out the actual pay scale. And that varies from call center to call center, so especially for them, it's difficult to find out. But there's been clearly some positive and negative things that have come out of this, and it's really difficult to know long term what this is going to be, but it'll be interesting to see. One of the things I'd like to know is if this is the same in other countries. That's not out there either. So, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll have 10 minutes if you have questions for Janet.
They're using the European framework for determining, so they give those like A, B, C level.
They're using, yeah,
C1, C1. Okay.
They're using the TOEIC exam for the teachers, and I asked them why, and they said because it's convenient. And so that's what they're using. And then yes, they put them in an A1, A2, B1, B2, C1. So they will not train them higher than a C1.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they don't mark.
Yeah, the be grabbed.
Right. Yes.
Did the professor who returned from tourism in a call center indicate to you why he'd done that?
Why he had gone?
Back to education.
Why he'd gone back to education? I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember if he did or not.
The reason I'm asking is there's a very, very similar pattern with science and technology teachers being lured off into engineering and business. And one of the directions the United States is taking with this is trying to get people who are in engineering and business to come back because they're bored to death. And I'm trying to imagine 3 months of handling your credit card problems.
Right.
And after a while, maybe those kids start looking more attractive.
Yeah. And they said, some of them said, it's not a lifelong thing. I might do this to pay my bills, but I'm not going to do this for life. What happens though is if they go out thinking I'm just going to do this for a little while instead of teaching, what people seem to think is that those people never come back to teaching. So that's another thing to research, if they're actually leaving and going
well, I think so, especially
someplace
since the
and if they come
salary
back.
has now become more comparable.
Yeah.
Janet, it makes me wonder, I think this was fascinating actually. They seem to view it as sort of a fixed phenomenon, that these call centers are going to be there, they're going to persist and all that. And I'm thinking, if we think about these escapes and flows, we know that, you know, one country benefits until the next country undercuts them, and these things continue to move. And so I'm just wondering, you know, are you thinking about what kind of frameworks you're going to look at these data and kind of think with as you try to make sense of this?
Haven't thought that far yet.
Okay.
Because it's pretty recent that I've
Yeah.
gotten into it. So I haven't, but yeah, that's a good thing to. But yes, they are thinking about this as going to be. I don't think they're thinking that this may ever go away.
Right.
And these companies, a lot of them moved to Costa Rica because it's nearer to the U.S. or to Canada, and it's less expensive than India or the Philippines. Same time zone, those kind of issues. So they kind of have this feeling like we have the edge, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna be able to keep this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So long term, and if the call centers go away, then what happens to all those people who are trained in English? And there seems to be a feeling that it has increased the overall level of English within the country, as well as other factors that have helped increase that.
Yeah, I really appreciate this picture of how the socio-cultural pushing of some kind of an enterprise pushes education in different ways. And I was thinking whether the university might respond by also instituting courses such as English for specific purposes, or also instituting some kind of university call center partnership whereby part of the teacher education program might have some internships in a call center to get them sort of attuned to the fact that this is not the best job in the world. That might be one of the underlying, but
yeah.
Doing something that might show some kind of responsiveness, but at the same time also training students to either become or work in that environment or a similar type of environment.
They do offer a shorter 2-year degree program that doesn't lead to being able to teach. It's actually going through a transition right now, exactly what that's going to look like. But what happens at times are the university students will go out to work in a call center, and because their English is one of the highest levels in the call center, they are quickly moved into a management position, or they're quickly even moved into a training position, and they're teaching English in the training center to the other people who work at the training center. So that's happening as well. That's another new job that has been created that wasn't there before.
By the way, this isn't your thesis, is it?
No.
It's a piece from the dissertation research,
Okay.
but this was
Okay.
not what I ever started out to.
I would not agree for you to do this total change.
No,
That's
no,
all.
it was a piece
Without
that came
informing
up.
your
You're
committee.
scaring Dr. Knight.
No.
Sometimes you can announce these things in public and then your professor has no power to do
No,
that.
actually, this is a piece that I found really interesting, but really isn't the focus of my dissertation. So I thought it possibly is a presentation, or it's an
Actually,
article, or something like that.
Have
The
you thought
cyber-
about call centers as an option?
If I get in trouble with my committee.
The cyber is going to have their conference here on the IU campus next year, so you might want to put in a presentation for that. Cyber is the business school's initiative for looking at ways that language intersects with various areas of business.
Oh,
Janet, I'm curious. You said that translation is the most prestigious career there. Why is that? Because I compare in Asia, in Indonesia, for example, translation used to be good job, but now since the technology, many people now can use Google Translate and they understand this thing. Why is that?
It kind of, there's a prestige scale. They told me translation is the highest, then English teaching, and then working at a call center. And so somebody would trade prestige for money to go work at a call center. But translation has always, it pays more. And for some reason, the culture has this feeling that to be able to say, I'm a translator. It's just this feeling that you're somehow special because they realize you have to have a high level of language to be able to translate. And so somebody who's making their living and doing really well at translation is going to have the highest, bilingual level. So I think that's part of it. I don't know the exact.
So the translation here, translating books. So in Costa Rica, there are many publications from English translated into Spanish.
A lot of what they're doing is for businesses, but because of the since around 1995 as well, part of the phenomena that has come with the transnational companies as well is when the information got out about Costa Rica being a good place for transnational companies, that also sparked information and interest in Costa Rica, which led to an increase in tourism. And that increase in tourism has led to an increased need for translation, because they have to translate all of the menus, all of the hotel brochures, all of that, then it has to be translated. So that has increased, but there's a lot of business materials that are being translated.